He's got a very diverse background, centered in environmental science, social justice, and the realization that you can't have a healthy planet without considering everything that is involved: social justice, clean agriculture, and community orientation to taking care of people around you. So we invited him here today to talk a little bit about the basics of building some good compost. I don't want to get too technical, so it's basic recipes for improving your soil. So without further ado, here's Josh Crow.
All right. Well, I am really excited to talk about compost, and what compost really means to me is about building soil. Yeah. And to me, you know, healthy soil is just so important. When I look at an unbalanced, unhealthy, biologically active soil, I think of like hydroponics, or I think of like miracle grow. And sort of in an equation or a metaphor, when we think about the development of plants, it's without healthy soil, and without healthy soil biology and healthy soil chemistry, it's really like when you have to feed bees sugar, or when you have to feed like a human baby some sort of supplement or some sort of soy milk or something. It's without healthy soil, if you get into the situation where you're creating an artificial or a synthesis of a healthy medium, then it's sort of like it's false and it's untrue. It's the real proof of this is in the nutrition of the food. The plants in general need about 50 or 60 elements to thrive. In your typical miracle grow, when you look at like the side of the label, what you read is 10, 20, 10 or something like that. Everybody's familiar with what that stands for? That's your NPK, which is your nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. Your nitrogen, potassium. No, your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and your potassium. Your K is your potassium. And so the idea is, you know, Miracle-Gro is something that they invented fossil fuels, and it was sort of the synthesis of healthy soil. So out of the 50 or 60 elements, a combination of elements that plants really need to survive, they really concentrated on the first 3 or 4 primary building blocks, this NPK. So instead of having the calcium and the boron and all these other nutrients, components in this vitamin mix, it's really falling short if you just go sort of with the Miracle-Gro approach. What I see also as far as building healthy soil and soil biology is really creating this healthy medium for that to happen, right? Because it is obviously really possible to just grow in water hydroponically. You can put all the nutrients in there and put them in a water-based solution, and the plants really soak it up nice. And hydroponics is fairly effective at growing vegetation. Where it's really lacking is the nutrition, yeah? So it's about creating a healthy biology in your soil. What you need to have a healthy biology in your soil is the medium, is the component parts. And when we talk about soil, does everyone have a sense of what the typical 3 constituent parts of soil are? When you think of loam, what comprises loam?
Topsoil.
Topsoil is another word for loam. Sand is a component.
Humus.
It's sand, silt, and clay. And the humus and organic matter is also a strong component. But basically, sand, silt, and clay is what makes soil, yeah? Those are your building blocks in general. We in New Hampshire, depending on where your property is and so forth, we are predominantly sand rich. We have a lot of sand. A lot of mineral type soil. What I have here is some of the topsoil from our land, some of the loam. And so as part of this, really, it's important to start to identify and, get familiar with this stuff, yeah? What's good soil, what's bad soil, what's good compost, what's bad compost. But in this, we have a lot of sand. You can feel it in between your hands, yeah? It's gritty. If you would take this into, let's say, a jar of water and shake it up, the sand would settle really rapidly. And the silt layer would be pretty thin. It would settle over the next day or so. The water and stuff would be really dark, and the sand would settle, and that would be 70-80% of what the composition of what the composition is. It's 70 or 80% sand, and the rest is the silt layer that's in clay, small amounts of clay that'll settle over the next. Well, clay will stay suspended for 2 weeks sometimes. But this is largely sand. And so usually when I'm judging that, I usually do the test where I shake it up in water and see how it settles out and see how the layers settle out. Or, you're just getting a feel for it. I'm going to pass this around a little bit. I also like to smell it. And occasionally I will taste it. I'm just trying to get a sense of it, what an old timer must know. You know what I mean?
What do you taste more? What are you looking for?
I don't really know. I think I'm thinking if it's salty or if it's sweet.
Do you want it salty or sweet?
You're just
curious.
I'm just curious as well. I think the smell is the best way to go. Smell and texture. I have another substance here, and this is more what's going to be silt. This is more the humus type stuff. I went into the woods today and dug out an old rotten maple tree out of the base of it, and it's almost like peat moss. Yeah? And you feel of it, you can feel how it will float. It will float and it's light and feathery. And to me, like if we mix this with that loam and a little bit of nitrogen, we're going to have all we're going to need, so to speak. Because this stuff right here, this wood-based product, is got stability to it. Stability is really, really important in soil, particularly up here where we have this sand issue and the water issues where all our nutrients are going to want to go away, right? Particularly the nitrogen and things that can become airborne. So it's important to have stability in our system. You have the sand and the mineral component. This is stability. You also want this woody element in your soil. Particularly if you're growing perennials, you're really interested in this sort of stability. It holds the moisture, as someone mentioned, as well as the nutrients and the life. Because it's not really always directly the manure or directly the hay that you're building compost with that's going to feed your roots or your plants, right? It's the biology that happens on that surface. So it's not just like plant roots are able to uptake certain elements. But often those elements are formed through the decomposition of biology. In healthy soil, in a teaspoon of healthy soil, there's more critters than there are people in New York City. Like 6 million arthropods. This is all microscopic stuff that's happening. Okay? But all these critters are what are eating the organic material and what are attaching to the organic material. And then it's the plant roots are uptaking the dead critters. That's why tilling is so effective to generate life in your soil and generate results in your garden, is because tilling aerates your soil. And when you aerate your soil, you have a flourish of microscopic activity. Subsequently, the microscopic activity dies, and that's what feeds your plants. Unfortunately, because tillage is such a tremendously violent process, this agitation and so forth, it's destroying a lot of the long-term stability of your soil system. So tillage is a very good way to get some short-term results. But in the long term, think about how an earthworm likes a rototiller. It's just not happening. Not a good thing. So if you want that long term to develop soil, healthy soil as it's been developed by a millennium, it's not necessarily a tiller's going to do that. A tiller is going to give you these short-term results. And that's why we favored it, because we're into immediate gratification lots of times. But in the long term, it's really this compost. Like I got some compost right here that we made, yeah? And this stuff is feathery and sponge-like. It's going to absorb that moisture and be able to release it. And it's just full of life. This is what can feed earthworms and can feed those arthropods and feed mycelium and mycorrhiza. Is everyone familiar with mycorrhiza? Mycorrhiza is another thing that's, microscopic. It's rare that you see it, but it's the web of life. It's really what connects the roots to one another as well as the roots to this. It's like it's a transportation network for nutrition on a microscopic level. So when you have this mycelium that's more or less a plant that's growing at a microscopic level, then you have all these little arthropods and the other bacteria and so forth that's living in that teaspoon of soil is using this as their transportation network. And that's how they all get around. And that's how water is getting around at this microscopic level, is this web of life we call mycorrhiza. Myceliums evolve as well. Mycelium is more like a mushroom. And it's fungus that's happening in the soil. And all these things are growing horizontally through the soil and vertically. So that provides the network for all this activity to happen. Because really, in active soil like this, you can't see it, but this stuff is alive. Fully happening, like when it's heating up. You guys have seen it heating up, yeah? The steam coming off an active. Now that is really pumping. That's the serious activity that's happening right there. I mean, it's generating heat, for heaven's sakes. That's some friction. That's some life happening there. That's thermophilic. At this point, it's relatively stable. And that stability is really what I'm looking for, to long-term condition the soil and to feed the plants. With this wide, this is like, to me, a multivitamin, right? So this is the multivitamin that has everything in it. And it's not just like Miracle-Gro that's got NPK. This is the stuff that's got it all. So just pass this around, and really once you get it, you can smell it.
Well, how did you make this?
That's what we get to. Oh boy. It's aromatic. This is the stuff that I have in a lot of quantity, right? I have a team of oxen, which takes grass and hay and turns it into these little joys. And this definitely smells. And you can still see, I mean, ruminants, they really tear it up, but you can still see the fibers in there. So it's not totally gone. Like this grass, this was 24 hours ago, right? And it's still not all gone. The cows have added some water to it and the bacteria in their stomach. And that's what we got here. So think about that as part of your package, right? It's not only the hay that the oxen just ate, but they also added water to it, and they added lots of bacteria to it, lots of life to it. What I have in my hand has been energized by their stomachs. And so we mix this with wood chips. Wood chips, we have a chipper. And we have the northern forest, which is our greatest resource around here of biology and life. And so we're taking these trees that are able to penetrate the Earth's crust, as tall as they are, in all likelihood. A tree and most plants have as much below ground as you see above ground. So whatever you see up there, like you can imagine that tree penetrating the Earth's crust and mining up the nutrition that's otherwise unavailable to us. And so if we chip this up and mix it with the hay and the manure, it's pretty much a done deal. Turn it a couple times and you have this stuff in 6 months. If that.
So, but how do you break it down?
It is a biologic process that is happening.
So that hay is going to end up looking like a fat bucket over there?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You just turn it.
Well, the beauty of our system is the animals are so helpful in this process. Because we feed the hay to the animals in the bin up front, yeah?
Right.
And we throw the wood chips underneath them so they stay dry and happy overnight. They can lay in the wood chips overnight. And during the night, they're eating their hay and they make a mess of it. And they spread it in the wood chips. And then they do some pooping and they do some peeing. And they lay down on it even. And mix it up a little bit. And in the morning, we come get it all and put it into a pile. So that the next day they have clean bedding. And we start all over. And we take that pile right outside the door and just pile it up. And if we do feel like turning it and accelerating the process, then we just turn it down the hill, take a pitchfork and roll it. As far as tips for doing this compost business, never try to do it uphill. You pile in one place and start working down the hill. And another thing you can do is if you are thinking about how you want to rotate these piles, you can start garden beds in areas where you had your pile. Like, start a compost and switch it around the location and then turn that area into your garden bed. Because it'll pretty much, eradicate most of the vegetation that's there as well as enrich the soil. So you're getting a 2-for-1 there. It's almost like sheet mulching.
Okay, so I have a lot of chickens and I have a lot of wood chips and chickens. So I tarp it to make the process, break it down a little bit, heat it up.
I like, it really depends on how much moisture you're feeling like you need. And the way I evaluate that, as far as your moisture content in your piles, is the smell. If you have too much moisture, if things are getting foul, you'll really smell it because it'll go anaerobic. And what you want for hot compost, particularly for animals, is aerobic decomposition. And that's the hot compost. And so water's going to be helpful as long as it doesn't turn it into a swamp. As long as it doesn't turn it into like a soup.
Well, I guess I'm asking, should I add hay? Because you got all that hay. Should I add leaves?
These are great questions. I add as much stuff as I can come by. It's just the proportions. So if I can find organic material, I'll use it. Grass clippings, leaves, leaf mulch, seaweed, sawdust, wood
There's
chips.
seaweed up here.
Don't ask, but there is it is sort of a kitchen sink recipe is really what you're going for. The tune-in of that is proportions. It's really about proportions, and it's about timing and layering it and mixing it in the most suitable way for you. Let's sort of take those one by one in reverse order. Piles. Big piles are usually better. They generate more heat. You get more done. So I like to make big piles. But the bigger a pile is, the harder it is to turn. We already talked about turning it downhill. We already talked about trying to convince your husband or another significant other to use the front end loader. That really works good too. But otherwise, you're into sort of turning it over with a fork, and you can make these bends and so forth. But in all practicality, I feel like you're going to need at least 1.5 meters cubed to make a hot compost pile. So you're going to need about that much to make something happen. 1.5 meters cubed is about this wide, like a square. So you're thinking like 1.5 meters, 1.5 meters square, all dimensions. That's about how much you're going to need to get a really nice hot compost going. Okay, so one thing is turning it. And you can turn it, like they make those tumblers you see on TV or whatnot, or other things, and they work. They can get your compost, but you once again will have to be very careful with the ingredients you mix in and so forth. And it's such a small thing. More or less what you get out of it is lots of to drop it. Whatever drops out is more or less sifted compost. And we also, the bin system is really popular. What I also like to do as far as creating this 1.5 meters is to take good fencing, good stiff fencing. Not necessarily chicken wire. Chicken wire is not going to be stiff enough unless you put some stakes around it. But some good stiff fencing, like that 1x4 cube or the cattle fencing that's pretty stiff, and get that set up. And then turn your pile into that, create your pile in layers. And then when you're ready to turn it, just take that enclosure and put it right beside it and turn it into that. So it's like a portable one almost, without having this permanent bin structure, and you'll get vertical height. Vertical height is super important to be generating that heat and to allow that drainage to happen through it, to allow that water to percolate on through. But yeah, if you can go as high as you can get is really important, which is hard. I mean, you got to either lift it up or find that front end loader, or, It's really nice if you can figure out a way to use somebody else's equipment once every 2 weeks for this. If they can come over and just turn the pile in 15, 20 minutes, it would be really helpful. That's particularly what I suggest if you can come by large enough amounts to make it worthwhile. Alright, well let's talk a little bit more about ingredients and the proportions. Yeah? So you have a lot of chicken manure and you have a lot of wood chips. And you're mixing them in at that primary stage. You're like, are you using wood chips in your chicken areas to help?
Right, we use chicken, and we use the chips, buying the bag, the chips.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Yeah, excellent. And so sometimes what I'll do too with the chickens is go ahead and add some hay to their laying boxes, and they'll tend to pull it out anyway. They like to make a mess of everything, but if it is in there, then it keeps the eggs sort of clean, gives them a nice spot. But then that'll go ahead and introduce it. And so you're not necessarily doing that first mixing, you're getting your chickens too. Which is really wherever you can save work in this process, you're looking to. And the chickens are going to do stuff like that anyway, like scratch bedding around. Let them. Encourage them to. Maybe throw a little feed in there and have them mix it up. There's definitely lots of people who do that with pigs like crazy. They'll layer corn as they're making a huge compost, and and then have the pigs just go mix it up.
You don't have to say that, okay?
Yeah, you don't have to pay them when you get hearts. But you have your chickens do, or your animals do as much of the pre-mixing as possible. Then you got to figure out how to get it out of there comfortably and get it into something. So lots of people will load it out of some window or something. There's a huge pile at the back. If you can get it out into the bucket of a tractor or into some sort of bed of a truck or something and take it to a more suitable location, that seems like a better way. I see a lot of stables and so forth that the manure never really gets to compost because they're just throwing it out the back door, and just more or less leaving it there forever. Which it will make compost eventually, but if you want to, really get this process going, then perhaps you should take it to a more suitable location where you can mix in other ingredients and so forth. But to me, another thing you could potentially do with your chickens, if they're in their house, is bring them some grass clippings. Because they might like that in the summertime too. They'll pick through it and eat it. We'll bring our chickens weeds. Oh my goodness, at a time, truckloads of weeds at a time, and just have them go bazooka with it. They just love going right through it, eating flat grass, stuff that you don't want to throw in your compost. Like if you have weeds that have gone to seed, is really not the place for in your compost pile. You don't want to take a big lamb's quarter plant that's just seeds all over and put that into your compost. It's really green and it's really ripe for decomposition, but it's also putting a whole bunch of seed in there. It's more or less a repository for lamb's quarter at that point. So what I do with something like that, I feed it to the chickens first, let them glean all the nutrients and make eggs with it, and then you have whatever's left. That's what you can compost. But yeah, in terms of these proportions, there's a pretty song.
Yeah.
There's the proportions. Okay. Basically with compost, the main ratio that you're looking at, does everybody know this one? Is the carbon-nitrogen ratio. Okay? And that, it's just sort of a different realm of elemental biology. But carbon-nitrogen, this is different than the NPK. This is nitrogen and carbon. And basically, good compost has a 30-to-1 ratio of carbon to nitrogen. When we get to the end of this, let's just go ahead and say it. I've been to so many lectures and conferences and listened to them talk about compost, scientists, academics and so forth, and no one has ever been able to tell me if that's by weight or by volume.
How do you measure to begin with anyway?
Well, these
Is there
different...
test strips?
The compost that's finished has that sort of ratio because it's so conducive to the biology. When you have that ratio, then you really have conducive biology. They have measured things like manure. Manure is like right around 9-to-1, 12-to-1, something like that. So it is hot. It's nitrogen rich. Your sawdust and like wood chips can be up to 400-to-1 carbon to nitrogen. So you take that knowledge and you really don't know if this is by weight or by volume, but you figure if you want 30-to-1 and you have this amount of sawdust, which is 400-to-1, and this amount of manure, which is 9-to-1, you want to get the right mix together. Yeah, well, it's a lot like making soup. You get a lot better at it the more you do it. And you'll get to the point where you can see and taste what you're looking for and sort of see beforehand, well, I'm going to have to add some more of this. And so this sort of timeline process is, I think, where we'll get into now. A little bit about the piles, a little bit about the ingredients, a little bit about this timeline. Because, like I said, we take this right out of our barn. I mean, I went and got this out of the barn today. So this, when it hits the pile, you can turn this every time the heat re-attains its maximum, which will usually happen between 7 and 10 days, and you can get a thermometer to check. You're going up to 140 degrees. It's really nice. You get it up to 140. I've heard of 160, but I've never really gotten it. Gotten a little bit, maybe 150. But so every time it gets up to that heat level and reaches that maximum, you go ahead and turn it. So that's every 5, 7, 10 days. If you want to, or you can let it sit. It's just going to take a little bit longer. The reason this particular composition works so wonderfully well is because you're adding nitrogen on top every day in the manure form. And this, you see how this is all stacked sort of haphazard? Is wonderful for letting air and water get in. It really, when the rain hits it, it disperses evenly through it. And there's always ways for air to get in here. And air and water are what's going to feed this process of thermophilic decomposition. So, when we get these piles going, one of the first things you'll see is this white mold, fungus stuff start to grow on it. Good. Great. That's, the web of life happening. And then the second stage, it'll all sort of start to brown out. Right? Nitrogen is green, in essence. I sort of put it in that color term, but it is really the richest source. If you really want to activate a brown pile with some green, is to get some grass clippings. And if you get grass clippings and cut them and put them in a pile, they'll get hot overnight. It's that available nitrogen doing its magic. Within a couple days, that pile of grass will smell. It'll smell like ammonia, right? It'll smell sour. And that, unfortunately, is your ammonia, your nitrogen is going up into the air. Right? Whereas, if you've taken this green stuff and put it with your carbon, it stabilizes it. And it makes it so it can be eaten by biology. Otherwise, if you can smell it, something's gone wrong. It's going up into the air. You want to stabilize that nitrogen in this process. You want to keep it there. You want to keep it in the soil where the biology can be nourished by it. When we get into a situation where you just cut your grass clippings and you put them in a pile all by themselves, and it goes anaerobic, and the nitrogen starts to go up into the air, it's because there wasn't the proper mix happening to allow the biology to happen, to allow the nitrogen to be captured and stabilized. It's just super volatile. This nitrogen wants to go up in the atmosphere. The atmosphere, nitrogen it's not oxygen that's the most predominant element in the atmosphere, it's nitrogen. It's like 80% nitrogen. The oxygen is like less than 20 or something. It's like 6% or something ridiculously low. But nitrogen is everywhere. And nitrogen wants to go up into the air. That's why plants' legumes, you guys have heard of nitrogen fixers and so forth? Mm-hmm. Nitrogen fixation is so important. When you talk about crop rotations and planting legumes, it's because we want that nitrogen that's so abundant in the air in the ground. And it's so volatile that it wants to leave us. That's once again why we need stability in our soil. And we need things other than this sand. This sand has no capacity to hold and stabilize. It has no capacity to hold the moisture. It has no real capacity to hold air. And it has no capacity to hold the life that we need to capture the nitrogen. I love compost. It's really fun stuff, isn't
What
it?
about compost tea?
Yeah, she had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Alright, I just got done with this whole moderating business. I'm fired up. I'm really on the game right
I'm
now.
a former teacher. I don't follow those rules.
Oh,
What about sunshine on your compost pile? And also, can you use the dried compost that you get at, Home Depot or something?
Okay.
The dried cow manure. Should that work?
Okay. First question: sunlight. Sunlight doesn't really help the microscopic activity. For the most part, this is really a lot of what we're trying to do is mimicry with nature. When I look at like the forest and I look at, say, that rotten stump and how that's going to build soil for eons, how this whole system's working. The soil and this whole life thing is in a zone that is a transition zone in ecology. So soil is this boundary between earth and sky. Like the beach is the boundary between the ocean and the land. A lot of activity happens there, and the biology happens there because there's species that are adaptable to the ocean and there's species that are adaptable to the land, and right on the beach you get a combination of all this stuff. So that same thing's happening in the ecology in what we call soil, this boundary between earth and sky. And so right there at that soil level, that first 5 to 10 centimeters, first 2.5 inches, is where air can penetrate readily, water can penetrate readily, and all of these microscopic biology can happen. But the microscopic biology really likes shade. It doesn't necessarily like the sunshine. The microscopic biology likes a cover. It likes leaves, and it likes mulch, and it likes grass to fall down over the top of it. Some of the most effective topsoil that has ever been created in the world was created in the Midwest. When the settlers arrived in this country, there was 4 to 6 feet of topsoil in the Midwest. Yeah, and what had happened is over eons, it was just like the sod would grow up and fall over, and then the sod would grow up and fall over, and the sod would grow up and fall over, and that's what built, over 10,000, 50,000 years, built that 4 to 6 feet of topsoil. Now, unfortunately, it's like 8 to 12 inches. It's just because of the plowing, it exposes it to the wind, and it exposes it to the rain. Whereas that system, whereas perpetually mulched and perpetually protected, the biology just continued to accumulate and thrive. So there's the greatest history that I read of that is called The Plowman's Folly. It's a book by Edward Faulkner. It's really popular in the 70s. But in terms of your compost piles and keeping the sun off it, I have recommendations to put old towels or blankets or like old comforters or something over the top of it. Wet comforter. If you have this old wool thing you don't want to use anymore, cover your whole compost pile up with that. Just a wet.
So it likes the shade.
Likes the shade.
That's good news for me.
Because you're in a shady location?
Shade, yes.
Yeah, it shouldn't interfere. When you're looking for heat in that aerobic, that thermophilic compost, you'll be deriving that internally. It's not going to come from the energy of the sun. That heat is coming from the biology that's happening in the correct portions of your compost. Your ingredient mix, your soup mix. You know how many carrots you got in that first how many potatoes. So compost tea? Did I get your whole question?
No, the bags of dehydrated.
Okay, bags of dehydrated stuff. I am hesitant to buy anything from Home Depot.
Well, how about?
Okay, but that aside, Agway, I do frequent Agway. I like Agway locally owned. Really important to me. The idea I think you really want to look at with this is if you get something bagged, it's probably been sterilized to some sense, way form or another. In some way, either chemically or with some sort of heat process or something, they probably tried to sterilize it. I don't know why they went through all that trouble, but I really value the biology that's in there. I really value the biology that's in the cow's stomach that's going to make its way into the compost pile, and it's really going to help. What you have in there is more of a, it's a sterile. It's just, to me, like, if you get milk that's pasteurized and 2%, it's not as good to me as raw milk that's whole milk. It's not got as many nutrients in it.
Is it better than nothing now?
Yeah. But for the dollar, look where you're spending it, you know.
I know, but I don't have access to it.
Well, you might want to even go down to Clements, the place that's down on 25 across from, or any other nursery center. I hate to go by one by name, but most nursery centers will have compost by the yard.
Oh, they do.
And so they'll load it up for you and get somebody to pick up truck, load it in the back. And then to me, lots of times that can be a starter. If it is active, and you know it's active because it has earthworms in it. I can probably find the earthworm here. I tried to bring some with me. But if it's alive and it has earthworms in it, and it smells like the earth, and you know because you smelled it here, that then it's a great starter. It's like it's how you make yogurt or how you make any sort of other fermented thing. Often you need something to catalyze it. Sourdough, yeah, exactly. So if you get that biology, that starter, and you mix it in, I like to do that lots of times when I'm starting a compost pile.
Where would you get this?
Clements has got some. If you just want to come up, if you're just making a pile for yourself, literally a 5-gallon bucket would be enough, and you can come up and I'll give you a 5-gallon bucket. But yeah, if what you want is some earthworms and some, all of it. I'll give you all a 5-gallon bucket. I'd love to. But if you get this much and just mix it in real lightly everywhere, because like I said, in a teaspoon of this, you got more microbes than in New York City, so it's not going to take a lot.
Yeah.
But it's going to need to have somewhere where it can go and feed. And not too rough for it. Some piles can be too hot for earthworms or something. You know, you got a bunch of grass clippings. This is going to get too hot for them. They need some time. Here we go. There's a little earthworm. My friend.
Aren't some earthworms a problem? Aren't they spreading?
Yeah, they're destroying the northern forest, is what they say.
Really?
It is. It's amazing the balance that's been created in nature over time. In the northern forest, we're really blessed. This balance is in favor of soil development. But you go somewhere like the Amazon. They got no soil. Nothing. Because the temperature and the biology chew that stuff up instantaneously. Leaves get eaten before they hit the ground. But here we have, this resplendent speciation. The northern forest, there's 13 to 17 species of trees that just thrive in the soil condition. But yeah, the earthworm, once it gets into this northern forest, is going to eat their reservoirs of nutrition right up. And that delicate balance. Yeah, it is. It's rumored that the earthworm destroyed the northern forest.
Earthworm wasn't originally from Earth? No.
Yeah.
Came from Dallas.
Although
Ships.
headed through
These balances. Okay. So the compost tea, are we there?
Yeah.
Did we get through it? Compost tea, there's totally different levels of compost tea and how professional you are and how backyard you are. They do compost tea on industrial scales. Like they have big sprayers and run through orchards, thousands of acres at a time. I know guys that consult for like large agribusiness places that use compost tea. And compost tea to me is about making water soluble biology. So you're not taking like large quantities of this material, you're taking the biology out of this material and you're putting it in an environment where it will thrive, and then you're spraying that on the foliage of your plants.
Protection.
Um,
And for
Nutrition, protection,
the,
disease resistance, fungal resistance.
I'm trying to think of the names. The Grafton County Nursery is having a plant sale, I'm sure you're aware of that.
Yeah.
And I've ordered Christmas trees and that kind of stuff, but they also offered compost tea bags, which
Okay.
I've never seen sold before. And that's just their compost sewn up in a bag of some kind, and you dip it like a tea bag, right?
Okay.
I've never actually done this before. So
Yep. So there's different ways to do this. There's anaerobic, which is not generally considered good, and aerobic. So let's talk aerobic. Aerobic compost tea. This is not like biodynamic, where you make something and you turn it a certain way for a certain time and then spray. That's biodynamic, and it's a whole other facet. This is compost tea, is when you're putting the compost ingredient in, you're putting the air ingredient in, and you're putting something to make that compost to feed it. Lots of times in commercial operations they'll use some sort of sugar. Molasses is generally something that's used. A typical compost tea ingredient would be, the mix to make this soup would be to have a bubbler. So like your fish tank. So you get one of those in the bottom of some water. As much air as you can bubble through it. What I've seen is taking a garden hose and punch a gazillion holes in it and put a compressor up to it and push water through it. So it's just bubbling. And it's just everywhere. And then you pour the compost in and you pour the molasses in and it just creates this cauldron of life. It's more or less, it's just like you made some sort of fizzy drink.
Making me think of kombucha.
Oh yeah, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a fermentation. You are creating an abundance of life. You're creating a flourish, and then you're going to spray it on.
So if I get these tea bags, do I have to go through that procedure, or can I?
Well, me myself, what I usually do to make compost tea, I use it a lot, but I don't like to run this compressor thing. So I usually just take compost and put it into old nylon feed bag. You know what I'm talking about? Mesh.
Yeah.
Get the compost in there and just dunk it in a big 55. Leave it 24 to 48 hours. You want to use it before it starts to stink. You're going to mix it up, make sure it gets it all in there, and just dip your watering can in there and pour it around as you see fit. You want to have a little bit of more hesitancy, say put it on spinach. If you're going to go harvest that spinach the next day, you're not 100% sure this compost is fully stable, still maybe has a little bit of E. coli or something in there. You wouldn't want to
You
spray.
wouldn't use it on your lettuce.
Wouldn't want to do it on something you're going to eat out of hand. And, maybe use it, I wouldn't do that 48 hours before I pick my tomato. Maybe use that when the tomato's in a bit more of a vegetative state. Yeah. But I think it does help pest resistance, and it helps your foliage growth. Definitely. I'm an advocate of it. Compost tea on that level. I also use a lot of comfrey leaves. I'm not sure you guys are familiar with the plant comfrey. If you don't have it, if you do have it, you're never going to get rid of it.
That's right.
And if you don't have it and you would like some, be very cautious about where you plant it because it will be there forever.
Yeah.
But comfrey is a plant that we've term in permaculture a dynamic accumulator. Okay? And there's a wide variety of these plants. But what I mean by dynamic accumulation is they bring up nutrients from below ground and deposit them on and accumulate them on the soil surface. And so lots of plants are doing this all the time, but some are particularly good at this. And what I really I sort of am identifying them through several factors. I'm identifying their roots as club and powerful like. They're like roots that you can't get rid of. And they're multi-pronged and they're almost like clubs. Like horseradish or burdock. Yeah. Like these are powerful, powerful plants. And so you see that root structure and it's able to draw up nutrients. And then you see the leaf structure, and you look at the leaf structure and you say, wow, that has a serious vascular network. Like that whole, if you look at a comfrey plant, for instance, and you can see the veination all through it, the vascular, the power of its system of circulation is very strong.
Can you eat the plant?
Comfrey? Some people do. It's not advisable. It's pretty strong stuff. If internally, it's a very powerful herbal plant. It's called boneset as well. It is recommended if you're going to feed it to animals, not to feed over 10% of the animal's diet. Some people do use comfrey internally, but you want to be really cautious.
That was good for cows' digestion.
Oh, yeah.
That's what we got originally.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't want it anymore. What good is it now?
What good is it
Yeah,
now?
beyond taking over my space.
I chop it down every time it comes up and put it in the compost.
Because my neighbor planted a whole bunch of it, and he's into permaculture, and he thought it was wonderful. I didn't know what it was. Put it all along his front yard.
It's just like grass, except for more powerful. Like, I love people's lawns if they'll give me the grass clippings. If they don't want to use that, like, I think, woo, that's good stuff. But with the comfrey occupies very little space, so to speak, on your footprint, but it's bringing up a lot per square foot. And so, yeah, I cut it every single chance I get and just throw it on the compost, feed it to the animals. It's fodder. It's compost fodder. It's animal fodder. It's part of the package of the many things we're going to need to grow healthy compost in animals. It's not necessarily the part of the package we need for us, but it's all in the layers. The complexity of it, we're trying to build the diversity of the strength of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a city girl and I don't know how to ask this question delicately, but I don't have any chickens or pigs or cows or goats or anything like that. Would it be acceptable or even advisable to throw dog doo in the composting? I have a dog.
Yeah, it's a big taboo.
It is.
It's a big cat and dog feces is a big taboo. And I don't have the science to explain what diseases we're particularly talking about, but I think it is a pathogen issue. I'm sure it could be eradicated with proper composting at a high temperature and so forth. I mean, they compost dead animals. You know, a large farm, yeah, the whole cow compost. Oh yeah, chicken.
Okay.
They'll throw tons of dead
I
animals.
thought no meat. I thought when you do composting, you're not supposed to put meat in.
I think that's to keep the animals away, like coyotes and stuff.
Oh.
Yeah.
But you never mentioned anything about vegetables or coffee grounds. Or I mean, I don't have chickens or anything like that. You know, farm animals. So I use all the vegetable stuff.
Absolutely. But you're going on the end of things, I think. If you're just doing coffee grounds and vegetable scraps,
Well, and grass clippings and all that other
grass clippings, you're still on the end side of things. Like, as far as, you probably will still have some odor issues, sort of ammonia-like, you have too high of an N concentration. I guess with you, I would suggest maybe getting a bale of hay or straw occasionally and mellowing it out, or just getting a load of wood chips or sawdust to mellow it out a little bit. But definitely, kitchen scraps and coffee grounds, super nice. Some kitchen scraps I worry about putting seeds in. Tomatoes you have a problem with. They don't want to compost this tomato seeds. So I'm a little bit hesitant on tomato seeds. I mean, the human body won't digest a tomato seed.
What about the eggshells?
Eggshells, I include myself. Once again, you guys might have troubles with the raccoons and so forth. Once again, I would layer it. Layer it, cover it up. Don't let it be exposed to the not being conditioned with carbs and just being exposed to the air, because it's going to translocate rapidly into the atmosphere, unfortunately. But if you can get a little brown on top, get that layer effect, get things start heating it up, and once that nitrogen becomes airborne, then it can get used in the next layer. Am I on time?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah,
I'm over time, you guys. I'm out of here. I gotta go. I'm late. Alright, so the show's over. I got lots of annual reports. What I really don't want to leave without letting you guys know about, and I really would encourage you to take one of these if you can, is this event, May 12th at Plymouth State. It's with Dave Jackie, who wrote this huge book called Edible Forest Gardening, and he's the Northeast expert on this topic. In edible forest gardening, he's really into creating ecosystems that are modeled on forest, modeled on grassland, modeled on wetland, but produce abundance in terms of food, in terms of the benefits to the wildlife and the benefits to the ecology. So it's all about designing, much like you would design an ornamental landscape. This is designing an edible, ecological ecosystem. And this guy is the authority in the region, and we're really fortunate to have him come up. He's also part of the permaculture class up at DAcres, but he'll be speaking for free May 12th at Plymouth State. And we're just going to try to pack the house, get as many gardeners as we can in there. But if you're into gardening or landscaping, or you're just into a healthy ecology, it'll be a wonderful talk. But I will leave you guys with some calendars, perhaps a couple for DAcres.